Garum. Ancient Rome and Greece, 7th century BC onward. Before ketchup, before soy sauce, before fish sauce as we know it, there was garum. And if you were alive in ancient Rome, this stuff was everywhere. Garum was a fermented fish condiment made by layering fish whole, guts and all, with salt in large clay vessels called dolia, then leaving them to liquefy in the Mediterranean sun for weeks or months. The liquid that pooled at the top, that was garum. It smelled horrific during production. Romans literally passed laws banning its manufacture inside city limits. But here's the wild part. Romans put garum on everything. Sweet dishes, savory dishes, wine, medicine. It was their all-purpose flavor balm, essentially ancient MSG. The finest grade, called liquamen, was so prized it was traded across the entire empire. Pompeii had a garum factory district. Archaeologists found hundreds of amphorae still labeled with their producer, variety, and vintage, like ancient hot sauce bottles. Silphium. Ancient Carthage in Greece, 7th–1st century BC. This one's a tragedy. Silphium was a plant that grew along the coast of Cyrene in modern-day Libya, and the ancient world was absolutely obsessed with it. It was used as a spice, a medicine, a contraceptive, and a cure for nearly everything. Greek and Roman physicians swore by it. It was worth its weight in silver. Cyrene put it on their coins. Julius Caesar reportedly stockpiled it in the Roman treasury. The problem? Nobody could cultivate it. Silphium only grew wild in a narrow coastal strip, and as demand from Rome exploded, the harvesting became unsustainable. By the 1st century AD, Pliny the Elder wrote that only a single stalk had been found, which was promptly sent to Emperor Nero as a curiosity. Silphium went extinct. We've never definitively identified the species. Some scholars think a related plant, a Saphoetida, is a close substitute, but the real thing? Gone forever because the ancient world ate it into oblivion. Ancient Egyptian bread. 3000s BC onward. Bread was not just food in ancient Egypt, it was currency, it was religion, it was survival. Workers who built the pyramids were paid partly in bread, up to 10 loaves a day, plus beer. Egyptian bread was made from emmer wheat, which is far harder and more nutritious than modern wheat. Bakers ground it by hand using stone querns, which, as archaeologists discovered, slowly wore down those stones and embedded grit into the bread. CT scans of Egyptian mummies show severely worn teeth from a lifetime of eating bread full of stone fragments. The Egyptians had dozens of bread varieties, conical loaves, flat rounds, molded into animal shapes for religious offerings. They even leavened their bread using wild yeast starters, essentially the world's first sourdough. And there's evidence of over 40 different bread types recorded in tomb paintings alone. POSCA. 3rd century BC, 4th century AD. Here's something that would surprise most people. Roman soldiers weren't always drinking wine on campaign. Many of them were drinking POSCA, a mixture of sour wine or vinegar diluted with water, sometimes seasoned with herbs. It sounds awful, but POSCA was the Gatorade of antiquity. The acidity killed bacteria in questionable water. The vinegar provided energy, and it was lightweight to carry. Roman legions marched across continents powered in part by this stuff. There's even a moment in the New Testament. At the crucifixion, a soldier offers Jesus a sponge soaked in something sour. Many historians believe it was POSCA, not cruelty. Standard field ration. POSCA was so normalized that what reads as mockery to modern readers may have simply been a soldier offering what he had. Mesopotamian beer. Ancient Sumer, 3500 BC. We have a 4,000-year-old recipe for beer. It's written in cuneiform on clay tablets and is part of the hymn to Ninkasi, the Sumerian goddess of brewing. It describes making beer from twice-baked barley bread called babir, soaked in water, fermented with honey and dates. Mesopotamian beer was thick, chunky, and had to be drunk through long straws to filter out the grain residue. Images on cylinder seals show people drinking from communal vessels with these straws, essentially the ancient world's version of sharing a round at the pub. Beer in Sumer wasn't recreational. It was caloric, nutritious, and safer than water. Workers at the ziggurat construction sites received beer rations as wages. There were laws governing its quality and distribution in the Code of Hammurabi. A tavern keeper who watered down beer could be executed by drowning. PTISAN. Ancient Greece, 5th century BC. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, had a prescription he gave to nearly every patient, PTISAN, It was barley water, made by boiling whole barley and straining the liquid, sometimes with honey, vinegar, or herbs added. He wrote about it extensively. PTISAN for serious illness, then PTISAN for lighter complaints. He believed it was easy to digest, soothing, nutritious, and kept fevers manageable. What's remarkable is that modern nutritional science has largely vindicated him. Barley water is genuinely rich in beta-glucan fiber, which lowers cholesterol and moderates blood sugar. What the Greeks understood empirically, this stuff is good for you, we've now confirmed biochemically. You can still buy barley water today. The ancient world's medicine cabinet item became a sports drink. Roman dormice, 1st century BC, 2nd century AD. Edible dormice were a luxury delicacy in Roman cuisine, and they were farmed in special clay pots with ventilation holes called gloraria. Romans would fatten the dormice on acorns, chestnuts, and walnuts over several months, then cook them in various ways, stuffed with minced pork and pine nuts, glazed with honey and poppy seeds, or simply roasted. The author Petronius mentions them in his Satyricon as a showpiece dish at extravagant banquets. This wasn't a niche habit. Archaeologists have found gloraria across the Roman world, in Britain, in Germany, in North Africa. The practice was widespread enough that the Roman Senate at one point tried to pass sumptuary laws limiting the consumption of dormice at banquets. Gluttony legislation. For a rodent. Ancient Chinese soy sauce. Han Dynasty China, 2nd century BC. Long before it became a global condiment, soy sauce began as a byproduct of fermenting salted soybeans to preserve them. The earliest references appear in Han Dynasty texts, where it was called zheng, a paste of fermented grain or soybeans. The liquid that separated from the paste during production became its own product, zheng, literally zheng liquid. It was thin, salty, deeply savory, and transformed cooking across East Asia over the following centuries. What makes ancient Chinese fermentation remarkable is the precision of microbial management without microscopes. Brewers knew exactly which vessels to use, which temperatures, which seasons, and which batches of culture to carry forward. They were managing complex ecosystems of fungi and bacteria through observation alone, a kind of empirical biotechnology millennia before the word existed. Apicius Roast flamingo, ancient Rome, 1st century AD. The cookbook De Re Coquinaria, attributed to the gourmand Apicius, is the oldest surviving recipe collection in the Western world, and it contains a recipe for flamingo. The preparation involves boiling the flamingo with dates, pepper, cumin, coriander, and laser, likely asafoetida as a substitute for Silphium. The text casually notes that parrot can be prepared the same way. Flamingos were not everyday food. They were theatrical, expensive, visually striking, served at elite banquets as a statement of wealth and access. The tongue was considered especially prized. What's striking about Apicius is how modern much of the book reads. There are recipes for patina, essentially a frittata, stuffed dates, rose wine, and elaborate sauce reductions. Roman haute cuisine was sophisticated. It had umami layers before anyone had a word for the concept. Pulque, ancient Mesoamerica, 2000 BC onward. Long before European contact, the civilizations of Mesoamerica had developed pulque, a fermented alcoholic drink made from the sap of the Magi agave plant. Harvesting pulque required extraordinary skill. A farmer called a tolachiquero would carefully hollow out the central heart of a mature Magi plant, a process taking years of preparation to create a cavity that would fill daily with sap called aguamiel, honey water. This was collected and allowed to ferment naturally. Pulque was deeply intertwined with Aztec religion. It was associated with Mayahuel, goddess of the Magi, and the 400 rabbit gods of drunkenness. It wasn't freely available. Consumption was heavily regulated. Elders could drink freely. Young people caught drinking outside of ritual contexts could face severe punishment. It was sacred, medicinal, and ceremonial, not a casual drink. Byzantine garum, fish paste evolution. Byzantine Empire, 5th–15th century AD. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, garum didn't disappear. It evolved. The Byzantine Empire, successor to Rome in the East, continued fermented fish traditions under different names and with regional variations across the Mediterranean and into Southeast Asia. The most remarkable thing about fermented fish sauce as a food technology is that it developed independently across multiple unconnected cultures, in Rome, in Southeast Asia, in Korea, in coastal China, because the underlying principle is universal. Salt and protein plus time equals deep, complex flavor. Today's Vietnamese nuoc mam, Thai nam pla, and Filipino patis are direct descendants of the same fermentation logic that drove garum production. The 2,000-year unbroken chain of fermented fish products connects an ancient Roman kitchen to a modern Vietnamese bowl of pho. Medieval pottage. Medieval Europe, 500 to 1500 AD. We've talked a lot about elite food, Roman banquets, Egyptian grain allocations, Aztec ceremonial drink. But for the vast majority of humans throughout history, the meal was pottage, a thick stew of whatever was available, cooked in a single pot over a fire. Pottage could contain oats, barley, peas, beans, onions, leeks, and whatever herbs grew nearby. Meat, if it appeared at all, was a minor ingredient rather than the centerpiece. This was the food of peasants, serfs, and laborers across medieval Europe for 1,000 years. It sounds bleak, but pottage was caloric, efficient, adaptable, and nutritionally sound when legumes and grains were combined properly. Across cultures, the one-pot meal of grains and pulses, dal in India, congee in China, pottage in Europe, represents humanity's most durable culinary technology. Not a delicacy, not a statement, just food that kept people alive long enough to make history.